Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Cose webinar on the new DOL overtime rules, what the new rules mean for your small business. My name is Steve Millard. I'm the President and Executive Director of Cose, and we're pleased to host all of you today for this important information about something changing that all of our businesses need to know a little bit about. I am joined today by two of our Cose member experts. I've got Mireille, and I'm not going to try Mireille's last name. Mireille, why don't you pronounce your last name?
Boshniak-Mihalik, but the Mireille is very good.
Mireille is good, so we're good on that. And Mireille is a company called HR. She is a former HR practitioner and also an HR expert and consultant, works with a lot of small companies on HR issues. I'm also joined by Keith Asmith from Prompt Ward, LLP. Keith is a former chairman of Cose, former chairman of the National Small Business Association, which is Cose's federal advocacy partner, and has been very involved in this issue over a long period of time. I also should mention that both are experts for us in terms of helping small businesses with the issues they have. So if you ever want to check out some of our experts at the CoseExpertNetwork.com, that's another resource for you to find out more about all kinds of areas for your business. So after that shameless self-promotion of the Cose Expert Network, let's move to our topic at hand here. So this issue has been something that has been on the burner, if you will, for a couple of years as the DOL has worked through creating these new rules. And fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, they came to finality on it a few months ago and have published that rule that will be coming into effect by December 1st. So we're going to talk about that today, what the rule is, what it means, how it affects your business, and what some of the things are that you should be thinking about as you approach this for this new implementation starting December 1st. So I'm going to turn it over to Keith to start out, and we're going to team through this as we talk through the issues today, and we're going to try to just a little informally. We'll ask some questions along the way. If you have questions along the way during the webinar, please use the chat function in the webinar. Adina Magda, our event manager, is in the background running all the bells and whistles here for the webinar. So she will get your question, and we will address those questions as we get toward the end. So let's start out here, Keith, with a little bit of background on the issue.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have, thank you, Steve. I'm looking forward to this program, because it's really important for employers to understand the implications of what the Department of Labor has done. The rules changed. As Steve mentioned, they issued this final rule last month after a rulemaking process that involved their receipt of over 300,000 comments, which they basically ignored to come up with most of what they did. But what I think it's good to start with a little background on the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Act was passed in 1938. It covered a number of issues, most importantly minimum wage and overtime protections. The idea was to broaden the number of people who were working by limiting the number of hours each individual employee could work. And they put a penalty in, which is 50% of the regular rate for all hours worked over 40 in any one work week. That has not changed in the time since 1938.
So overtime is still 50% of the wage rate.
Yeah, time and a half the regular rate. And there's a whole slew of rules on what the regular rate is and what you calculate to go into that. But that's beyond what we're going to be talking about today. Now, over the years, the Department of Labor has through rulemaking, increased the ways to get exemptions. So there are some exemptions from the overtime rate. Those include certain outside commission salespeople, various temporary seasonal employees, and for our purposes, various specific types of salaried employees. Those would include administrative, executive, and professional white-collar employees. And all this goes back to 1938 and the old concepts of blue-collar and white-collar workers.
And we'll talk about some of those exemptions and some of those details a little later in the webinar as well, but that's good overview.
Yeah, and what these new rules are going to do is require some changes for employers that could involve a great deal of expense for employers, and problems with morale of the workers who are affected by those changes. So, and probably a third thing is that all these changes are going to provide increased scrutiny by your employees and outsiders as to what you're doing now and whether what you're currently doing is in conformity with what the rules are. So it's important to pay attention to all of this. Now, we talked about the 50% and the salaried employees, and the test for exemption for salaried employees involves really three things. One is a duties test, and you have to have duties that fit within the administrative, executive, or professional categories. And then there are two parts to the salary test. You actually have to be salaried. That means that you get a fixed amount per week, regardless of how many hours you work. So if you work 20 hours, you get paid your salary. If you work 60 hours, you get paid the same salary.
Let me just stop for a second, because before we dive into the salary numbers and those pieces of it, on the duties test side, these tests basically, these are the requirements or the things that your employees might have to sort of comport with to be eligible to be called exempt employees, meaning they're not able to get overtime. You don't have to pay them overtime, right?
Right.
And I guess one of the things that, as we go through this, we need to think about is that for a lot of employers, you may be doing this wrong now, right? A lot of folks have different thoughts about, well, if I just call a manager, they can be an exempt. And so what these tests are sort of a list of things that here's what somebody has to be doing or what their work has to look like to actually be exempt. Is that a fair description of that?
Yes, and you mentioned one of the issues, a manager who really doesn't have any authority and doesn't actually manage anybody is one category. Inside sales is another big category of people that employers assume are exempt because they're on salary and they're making a lot of money, but their duties may not measure up to one of the categories.
And there's a really, I don't know if it's good or not, but there's a detailed listing of that, which is on the screen now, the link, and you'll be able to get this webinar. I think it'll be posted on our website tomorrow afternoon to have the link. But this link provides a fact sheet called fact sheet number 17A at the DOL.gov site. And it's a pretty detailed description of the specific things you look for in each of these areas to ensure that your employees are in fact exempt. So even though you've got to deal with this change, looking at how you're currently dealing with your employees and if you're doing it right is probably an important thing to do in this process.
And one of the things the Department of Labor did was talk about in the rulemaking process changing the duties test to something that would be more harmful to small businesses because it would adapt the California test of 50% of your time spent on something. But they declined to do that, so there has been no change in the duties test as part of this rulemaking.
So let's move on to the salary piece then. You started to talk about it a little bit before I interrupted you.
And so I talked about what salary is, and that's the first test. So there are some problems with deducting from salary for discipline if it doesn't fit within that, but pretty much we're going to assume that people are on salary or treated as actually being on salary. And then the second part of that test is the salary has to be, quote unquote, enough. And that's what this new rule has to do. Currently, the minimum salary to be exempt is $445 a week, which equates to $23,660 a year.
So that means that any employee who makes less than $23,660 cannot be exempt. Is that correct?
For these white-collar exemptions, yes. And then what the new rule did was change that minimum to something that is equivalent to 90% of the 90th percentile of all salaried workers in the lowest paid region of the country, which is the South. And that number equates to $47,476 a year, or $913 a week.
Now, we have that wrong on the slide. Keep it 90th percentile or 40th percentile?
It's 40th percentile.
So that's correct. So the standard then, or the benchmark is the 40th percentile in the lowest paid region in the country. Yep. That's a 105% increase in what somebody has to make to be exempt, and I guess theoretically that's a lot of employees, right?
It's a lot of employees, and it also creates a situation where your starting rate and the rate of other people might be both below, the starting rate might be below that number, and the rate for an experienced person in the same job category might be over it.
We'll talk about some of those complications as we move on. Now, there's also a high-end test, right?
And that's what I made a mistake and said 90%. That the high-end test is 90th percentile as opposed to 40th, and that's 134,000. And if you have a basic duty of that's within that white-collar exemption, and you're making this amount of money, then there's no further questioning about whether you're exempt. It does not make exempt people who just aren't white-collar at all. So if you have a really skilled, highly paid production worker in the factory and they're making $150,000 a year, they're still not exempt even under this test because their duties just aren't even close to being white collar.
So what this threshold does is say that if somebody's above this, it's a pretty simple look at, do they have discretion or judgment? Do they have flexibility? Are they really bringing in expertise? And if they cover one of those basic tests, the 134,000 is like an additional safe harbor sort of.
Yes.
Correct. So basically, to recap that, anybody making under about $47,000 a year, I think that was it, $47,476 a year, pretty much they're going to have to be not exempt. They're going to have to be paid hourly, with some limited exceptions here and there. I'm getting that look from Keith the lawyer saying, okay, there's always an exception, as we know.
Yeah.
And then as you go up, as you go to employees that make between $47,000, by the wrong way, $47,000 and $134,000, those folks can be exempt if they meet the duties test, which we talked about briefly. And then over $134,000, again, if they meet a little more abbreviated duties test and they're making more than $134,000, those folks can clearly be exempt as well.
Yes. Right.
So you said these amounts also adjust, right? Are some of the other changes here that you mentioned?
Yes, and in the past, the Department of Labor has always gone through a rulemaking process to increase that. So they've heard from people about the impact on their businesses if they raise the cost of their employees. In the future, that's going to be automatic. And more than automatic, it's going to be pegged to this percentile. And by pegging it to the percentile of salaried workers, it's going to have a ratcheting up effect. So 40 percentile now, it comes out to 47,000, but basically everybody below 47,000 is now going to become essentially an hourly employee. So you drop off the bottom 40%, and the next time you don't have the 40% at the bottom. So you're really ratcheting up those numbers automatically.
So that's going to have some longer-term effects for us as well.
Yes.
And then there's this other idea of quarterly supplementation. It's pretty complicated, but you want to just kind of briefly describe that for a second?
It's hard to describe in anything close to a very brief time, but essentially the employers now have the ability to provide a bonus at the end of a quarter, and that bonus would be includable in the salary of individuals for calculating whether they're exempt or not.
So we'll dive into the details of that a little bit in a couple minutes here, but essentially I don't change anything about their salary if they're under $47,000. I look each quarter to see how much they worked, and I make some adjustment to their pay, which is considered to be retroactive, so I don't have to pay overtime.
Yeah, and it makes it, yeah, it can be very complicated again, but it provides an opportunity for employers.
So now this stuff goes into effect, what, 4 or 5 years from now?
Yeah, if only. It actually is two things. One is you don't have a lot of time because it's December 1st is the date. And that means that if you have various programs and policies that apply to employees and they're on a calendar year basis, you're going to have 1 month that you've got to figure out what to do. So number one, you don't have a lot of time, and number two, it's a really inconvenient time.
Right. It would have been nice if they would have decided January 1st and made it consistent with everything else in the benefits and HR world.
Right.
So as an employer then, what do? I mean, do you just give everybody a raise? Do you, you know, I mean, this is going to cause a lot of problems in workplaces because $47,000 is a threshold. I know a lot of people, especially managers in retail locations or lower level managers that we typically look at as exempt, are going to sort of fall underneath that. So what do you do as an employer?
Well, probably there are two things. One is you can take steps to keep people exempt who are below that number. Or you're going to have to figure out a way to change and convert them to non-exempt and to avoid some of the worst impacts of having a number of people who are now salaried becoming non-exempt. If you do go to non-exempt, that requires changes in your record keeping. You're going to have to track hours. You're going to have to exert control over the hours that your employees who are now newly non-exempt work. That includes being much more rigorous about arrival and departure times and enforcing those. And in many cases, employers have different benefit programs, including vacations, holidays, time off programs, as well as we typically think of as benefit programs, your retirement plans and your health plans and so forth, that are different between management and non-management employees or hourly and salaried employees. So you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
So I guess you talked a little bit about, Keith, the fact that we can increase their pay so they get over the threshold, and that has lots of cost cases to it, or we change it to non-exempt. So I've got an employee who's a program manager that works for us, and they make less than $47,000 a year. Basically, but I've got an employee who is also a program manager that's making $55,000 a year. I mean, imagine those situations exist out there. Any thoughts on how to react to something like that?
Carefully.
Okay.
And I think Mireille will have some thoughts about how to handle that. It's a real, I mean, either one of those people could have objections to how they're being treated. The higher paid one could say, well, I'm not getting overtime, and the person who's in the same job category is. The person at the lower level said, well, I'm not getting the benefits that the higher level person is. So it really requires some delicate handling and figuring out what you're going to do when the lower paid person progresses through seniority to get to a higher level. And when they get to that, are they going to be upset that they're losing overtime?
So, and that's really where we are right now, right, in terms of dealing with it, because we've spent 2 years fighting this. Cose has fought this, National Salaried Society has fought this. As Keith said earlier, 300,000 plus comments filed to the DOL about why this is hard, especially for small businesses. So we gotta deal with it. So one of the pieces here is communication. You're talking about, Keith. I mean, do you guys want to pick up and talk about some of these things that they should start to do now?
You know, that is one of the key points is communicating to your managers because of any changes that may occur in what the employee is doing or not doing, and you know, talking to the employees that are affected, but also talking to the other employees and what this means. So it's really developing a communication plan with the executive staff and the managers so that a consistent and continuous message is delivered through December 1st so that people are not surprised or taken off guard. You know, as we go through the line, there's tracking of hours. You know, how many hours is that employee working? So determining, you know, how to track their hours, if there's a system that you need, and getting them used to noting exactly how many hours they're working and when they're working so that you can determine what's the best way to pay them. Is it leaving them at their current salary and paying overtime, or is it bringing them up to the threshold of the $47,000? But I think the key point in this is the duty. A lot of employers think, oh, if I get them at 47,756, I'm good. No, it is the salary and what they do. So this is the key point, and that's when it goes into looking at their job description, seeing what they're doing now, and determining based on the duties test if they're exempt or if they're non-exempt, and then paying them accordingly.
So let's take my program manager that I might have sitting out here doing work not making $47,000 a year. And I know they do a good job. I know they sort of, you know, do some good work for us. But sounds like what I should start doing even now is having them log the hours that they're working on things, so I know, you know, in this exempt role, how much time it's really taking, because I take that for granted right now. They get their job done in the 40 hours or whatever they have a week. They get paid their salary. I don't have to worry about if they're working at night, if they're not taking lunch and those things. How do I begin to process that inside my company?
Well, I think the first thing is to look at what they're doing, to see if they match the duties test for an exempt status. And I think that's the first thing to do. And if they don't, then you ask them to track their hours, and not so much on what they, when do they come in, when do they leave, are they working any overtime once they leave the office or before they get into the office. That's the key point. Keith?
Right. And that's going to be difficult as a transition, because, and part of what you do will depend on what you find out through this. And if you find out that this program manager is really working 60 hours a week, then you've got to expect that you've got to deal with 20 hours of overtime in some, and there may be other ways. But remember, you're going from 40 to 20 hours of overtime is actually 30, because you're taking time and a half. So it's almost doubling the potential cost of that employee for pay, if in fact they're working. So if they're not working, it's one thing. If they're working a lot of overtime, that's another.
So the first thing is understand, what's the scope of their work. Make sure I initially classified them correctly, that they really did meet the threshold of an exempt employee. And if they do, I've got to figure out how to get their salary up in a variety of ways, unless I want to turn them into an hourly. Okay, that's important. So job descriptions and handbooks are really important here, being clear about things like what they're doing, but then also on the handbook side, being clear about, do they have to take a lunch, how do they report hours, especially for folks who might not be hourly now, right? That's going to be new for them.
And also looking at the handbook and the policies to see if it affects the current employee's work style, or how they handle anything that they do for themselves. Because sometimes exempt employees have a little bit more liberties, coming in, flexibility, etc., versus a non-exempt. So it's looking to make sure that your handbook and your policies are not detrimental to that employee that now has to go into a different status.
So back to my program manager. So maybe that program manager, if he has a child, he's responsible for dropping that kid off at daycare in the morning or something. So he rolls in between maybe 8 or 9:30 every day, depending on what's going on. Does that have to stop? I mean, do I have to sort of stop doing that, or do I have to keep better track of that? Or he's got 2 other colleagues who have to be in at a certain time. So how do I deal with that? Because as an exempt employee, as long as he gets his work done, I'm good. But now he's an hourly. How do I deal with that?
Well, I think that's where you have to look to see if he has other people in his department that have to be strictly in and out. Either you open up the flexibility if it is a good thing to the other employees for that, or you restrict their hours. But again, I think that is something that you really, everyone at the company, the executive and the management team really needs to look at to see how to make sure that the work is not put into danger, so that people can still do what they do best.
Well, the other thing to be looking at here goes beyond just things we talked about already.
Correct. The review is, Keith had mentioned, reviewing bonuses, profit sharing structures, the 401k. It's really important to start communicating with your partners when it comes to 401k insurance, to make sure, again, that these employees are not negatively impacted. And Keith can talk more about grandfathering them in for that 1 month.
Yeah, so I guess the situation might be, you might have exempt employees that have one level of benefit and non-exempt who have another level. You may have more vacation if you're sort of a manager versus you're not. So we then start looking at these policies, I guess.
Yeah. And again, it's December 1st, so you've got 1 month, and people, if your vacation policy as a sort of informal benefit policy, and somebody's earned 11 months or been working under one program for 11 months, and then you want to take them for 1 month, you've got to figure out what to do for that 1 month. And in most cases, employers would prefer not to change if they don't have to. So legally, it's proper to kind of grandfather those people into for that, at least for that 1 month, so that they still have the same vacation that they were working under
So even though I tell my program manager that, you know, he's not no longer going to be exempt, he's now going to be an hourly employee, I can still give him the same benefits maybe of his exempt status for at least a month or two, or a month to get through it, and then figure out what I do January 1, whether I change it for everybody or he moves into a new status.
And just as a caution, if you are doing that for any of your programs for which you have benefit plans, written benefit plans, like a retirement plan or a written welfare benefit plan, you need to have that documented and do a plan amendment to grandfather people who became non-exempt on December 1st for at least that 1 month. So you're appropriately documenting.
This is where we say that this is a good place to consult your lawyer, your accountant, your other advisor, right? Yeah, yeah. This is can be complicated. It could be really easy if you just have one employee. It could be complicated if you've got people in lots of different situations at different levels in the same job category.
Yeah, and also communicating any changes to your payroll provider so that they are aware of employees moving from one status to the other. You know, and the two main policies, if you don't have people right now that are need approval for overtime, but creating an overtime approval policy, and also creating an overtime violation policy, because you'll have some, you know, employees who are dedicated, who want to come in early, want to leave, they don't care about this status thing, they want to keep doing a great job for you, but unfortunately, they can really get you to trouble if they do not abide by your overtime policy or work the hours that you have approved for them. And, you know, in some cases, you may have to write them up. And I know it's kind of counterintuitive because they're really doing what they've always done, being passionate about working for your organization, but they can really get you into a lot of trouble if they do not either get approval for overtime and you pay them accordingly, or if they hide the overtime. It is the employer's responsibility to make sure that you pay them when they work.
So I mean, if I again select my program manager, guy works pretty hard, works through lunch every day, doesn't mind doing it, you know, sort of really kind of make sure that if I know if he was to an hourly and I know he's not taking lunch on a daily basis, I got to stop that, right? I can't let him do that, or I've got to pay him for it, I guess. You know,
there's a concept in the Fair Labor Standards Act of suffering or permitting. And if you know or have reason to believe that somebody is working, you've got to pay him for that.
So even at night at home, he's on the couch banging out emails and stuff. That now becomes, if he's an hourly employee, my responsibility.
Yes.
So I have to tell him no emails after 5 o'clock.
Right. And you know, if you get an email from him in the middle of the night, then you know that he's doing some work at an overtime rate or outside of work hours. So you've got to deal with that.
Okay. That's going to be a problem for some folks.
Culture trumps rules all the time, and it's going to be really hard to change the culture. So I think we talked a little bit about this. Is a great opportunity. Now I know a lot of our folks who are listening today might not have a legal department, an HR department, but you might have a part of your brain where you've got legal stuff in it, and a part of your brain you're doing HR stuff. But this is a place where those functions have to come together and figure out sort of how to work through this.
And the other component is, again, to bring in your finance team to make sure that that they are involved as well when it comes to budgets and helping you with the calculations of the commission and the quarterly bonuses, etc. And obviously again the operations part of your organization, because there will be some changes in how their employees work and when they can work, and how will that affect your business.
So we talked about some of these things already. I skipped the slide there a second, I apologize, but we talked about some of these things: options to use your fees, finding a new exemption category, calculating an hourly rate, a quarterly adjustment, putting benefit costs in the salary. Do you want to hit just a couple of these, Keith, and explain what we're talking about here with one of these?
Yeah, the new exemption category is really probably limited, but doctors, lawyers, and teachers who have that as their primary duty do not have a minimum. So all the teachers in Ohio are not going to immediately start getting paid for their overtime. If you are a business that has employees who are training either your own employees or employees of your customers and using your systems, they can be exempt without regard to this minimum. So that's the first exemption category. calculating the hourly rate to take account of overtime is once you know how much work outside of 40 hours your potentially newly non-exempt employees work, you don't divide their salary by 40, you divide it by how much you would have to pay them. So if they're working 60 hours a week, and you would be paying them another 10 hours of overtime. So instead of dividing their salary by 40, you divide it by 70. And then as they work, you'd be paying essentially the same amount as you are now. And you could divide it by anything between 40 and 70 to ease their pain a little bit and ease yours some. The quarterly adjustment opportunity would enable you to take a look back at the end of each quarter to figure out how much exposure you have to overtime if they potentially were not exempt, and then make a pay adjustment, decide whether or not to make a pay adjustment in order to keep them exempt for that quarter. And then the final thing is putting benefit costs into the salary or taking them out of salary, depending on how you look at it. But if somebody's making $44,000 a year and you're paying $10,000 worth of benefits, you can take those benefits, add their salary, and make it $54,000, and then have those benefits be charged back to them. And you can adjust that through various methods like salary reduction plans, FSAs, so forth, that will actually reduce their salary from a tax perspective, but not from a Fair Labor Standards Act perspective. And they would remain exempt. They'd be getting the same overall package value, but it would be stated differently, and you would have them be exempt instead of non-exempt.
So let me throw an example there, because that's a little bit complicated, but I've got employees, and maybe today I'm paying 90% of the health insurance cost of my employees in addition to their compensation. And I have to make this change, so I calculate the change so that maybe my employees are now paying, instead of 10%, 30% of their benefit costs, which allows me to, I increase their salary to sort of cover that. It allows me to get up over the threshold, and it counts for this purpose of this rule. It doesn't cost me any more necessarily, and the employee isn't harmed by that either. Right? So it sort of balances it out. So that's an interesting strategy that you might think about there if you've got a few folks, but then you've got to make sure that you've got parity across all your employees, right? You can't have one group of employees paying 30% of their benefits and another group paying 10%. So that's going to have a ripple effect across your organization.
Yeah. Whether or not you can get away with it legally as a morale, practical, administrative issue, probably Marie would say don't do that.
Yeah. Right. And then don't forget, with all these different options, you need to remember that they have to also meet the duties test. So that's the big thing that I keep repeating is salary and duties.
That's the final thing we're going to look at here first. We're going to do another slide here or so, but before I do that, I want to remind folks, if you have questions, we're getting close to the end of our prepared comments, but if you've got questions, please make sure you put them into the chat function on the webinar, because we'd love to answer thoughts that you have, or just if you have situations that you want us to sort of talk about that might exist in your business. We're happy to do that too. Marie and Keith have a lot of knowledge on this, and I want to make sure we share that effectively. So if we think about moving forward on this again, there's some key points here about what do we do as legal and human resources work together on this. We'll talk about this for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the first point here about determining where everybody fits and who else is involved, because you really can't just do one thing. Because whatever you do to one will have impacts on others, and you have to manage that whole process. So the first step is to get knowledge about your own workforce, which you haven't been gathering because people have been exempt, they haven't been keeping track of their hours, and you haven't been caring about how many hours they work. But you may not have any idea how much time people are spending at home on their computers or coming in early before you as the boss get in to see what they're doing. So gathering that information is a really key part of all this.
And I guess the other piece here is figuring out where you're trying to get in terms of what you want it to look like in your company, and then planning towards that is your second point there.
Right. We know we have to be compliant, just like, we may know we have to go to New York City, but getting from here to New York City and getting from here to the new December 1st compliance date could be a variety of routes with a whole slew of either good or bad effects.
Yeah, and then it's key that employers start now, not in October or November. You really need to start now to get a hold of what this means to your organization, what people are doing. Because if you have a few employees, this may not take as much time. But if you have 5, 10, 15, 20, or more, 40, 50, this is going to take some effort to look to see what employee base and how this will affect your budget and your operation.
Talk about communications here, because so often these rules change for employers. They affect the workplace. They affect the employees, and folks don't get it. They think, all of a sudden I lost my status as an exempt employee, and that might mean something to somebody, or I've got to follow these new rules. So are there some best practices here on how to sort of get this message out to your employees?
Well, I think it's understanding your audience. What do you need to provide them to help them understand what these rules are, why you're now having to note their time, or why they're noting their time so you can determine the overtime. But I think this is the key, is to be as transparent as possible and provide them the information, because the other thing also is not only people will be looking at, tracking their time, but some people maybe think, I'm getting a raise to almost 48,000 in December 1st. Well, you need to set the expectations of what you have or have not decided to do prior to that date. Keith?
Yeah, and one of the impacts of this rule is that as people are talked to about it, they will give increased scrutiny to what you're doing now. And they may, if they're unhappy about going to non-exempt, they may turn around and say, well, wait, I should have been non-exempt all along, and go back 2 years and try to collect overtime if again, as Maria said, the duties tests haven't exactly been met. So it's really important to communicate, and I would say that it's not just communicating, but it's communicating and communicating and communicating again, so that people understand what's happening to them, why it's happening, and why you need to do what you're doing, and why it's good for them.
You make a good point, Keith, that this could open up a can of worms if all of a sudden somebody switches their classification because of duties. So maybe it's help people understand that something has changed. We're taking this as an opportunity to make sure that we've got everything aligned. We're going to look at our job descriptions and those things, which might give you the cover that you want to sort of make those kinds of changes or whatever. One of the questions that we got was, what if I am doing this wrong? What if I don't get this done by December 1st, and I've got, are there penalties here that occur for an employer?
Yeah, if it's not done by December 1st, and you're not in compliance, you're in the same situation as you are now if you're not in compliance. Right. Somebody's got to make a complaint. They have 2 years, 3 years in the case of a willful violation. But if you're just sort of ignorant and just don't make a change and it's not regarded as willful, people have 2 years to come back after you. So 2 years of overtime, and if you haven't been keeping good records, it's kind of their word against yours. And
I was showering, I was thinking about the business, you should have paid me back.
Yes,
that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Or saying, well, normally I've been working 60 hours a week this whole period of time. So
I get home after dinner, I do a couple hours of email after the kids go to bed, pay me for that, right?
Yes.
You see my emails and that kind of thing. Another question we got here: our admin makes $47,478 a year. I think that's the number. And then maybe a little somebody's giving us our time here, but in salary, their duties are administrative only. Are they exempt?
Maybe. You only need to make one of these tests. So you don't have to be professional and executive and administrative.
Right.
But if you are administrative and you meet the test for exemption, yeah, you only have to do that once. But if it's, when you say administrative person, do they have discretion and independent judgment? Are they basically the assistant to somebody else, and somebody else has all the discretion and independent judgment, in which case, no matter how much you pay them up to that potential high salary test, they're not going to be exempt because they don't meet the duties test.
And I think that's probably one of the grayest duties test is the administrator, because even as you look at that form, that's exactly what it says, exercise of discretion, independent judgment with respect to matters of significance. That could be up for discussion, but I think, if you have an administrative assistant who files, types, makes appointments, he or she is a non-exempt employee.
Yeah, so I mean, if they're doing the clerical stuff, but maybe they have full control over scheduling meetings, deciding where I'm going to be, handling maybe office management responsibilities, picking caterers, doing logistics for the office. Does that start to get into the
You're getting much more exempt.
Okay.
You're
So,
getting much more exempt,
judgment,
right,
discretion, some unique set of skills there. Okay.
that they do on a
Regular basis.
regular basis.
Regular basis, not just once a year, once a month. So somebody asked, where can we find the duty test? So the easiest way is when you see the webinar tomorrow, there's a link you can go to. However, if you just go to DOL's website at dol.gov, that's www.dol for Department of Labor.gov, and just in the search box put in fact sheet 17A, it'll come right up. And it's a fairly easy to read for a government publication sort of summary of things you need to know about the exemptions. And as Keith said earlier, you just need to qualify for one of the exemptions in order to sort of be okay for them to be exempt. So I guess as we're thinking about this in our businesses, many of us are not experts in this area. And there are a lot of resources that can help. If you don't have a lawyer or an advisor on HR issues for your business, that's something you probably should find, or maybe bounce these ideas off of. We're also obviously happy to connect you with members and experts who sort of know a little bit about this. Again, you can use the CoseExpertNetwork.com website, where you can sort of look for some folks. Ray is there, Keith is there, I believe, and we'll get you in touch with these folks. Their contact information is also available. So that you have that, I'll put it up on the screen for you, so feel free to jot that down. And again, this webinar will be posted over the next couple of days on our website.
Should I make a shameless?
Please, I was going to ask you both sort of final thoughts.
Well, more than a final thought, but this is in connection with this rule. Congress is currently looking at whether they should make an attempt to stop the rule in its tracks, and whether that will go anywhere or not. In reality, it's very symbolic to have the House of Representatives or the Senate pass a resolution that this is an inappropriate rule. So if we have scared you about the rule and its impact on your business, I would encourage you to go to the National Small Business Association website, nsba.biz, and on that site is a way to easily contact your representatives about this. And it's really critical, because right now, as soon as they come back from their recess for the conventions, they will be looking at this, and it's important to let people know what small business thinks of this rule.
So, but let's be clear on that. Congress will come back, maybe do a resolution, but that will have to move through the executive branch, and that is not going to happen under this administration.
It's going to get vetoed, yes,
right.
But it does make a statement, and it sets the course for the next administration.
So I guess my point on that, hope is not a strategy. You got to figure out how you're going to deal with it December 1st, and then depending on what happens in the November election, this could all go the other direction. It might take a little time. There's lots of ways it can go. Because rulemaking is at the discretion of the executive branch. So something to think about there, but definitely something to know. NSBA, National Small Business Association, NSBA.biz, B-I-Z. Website, they're a partner of Cose's for a very long time, maybe 25, 30 years. We've worked with them on policy issues. At the federal level, they're a nonpartisan small business-oriented organization driven by small business owners like Keith and Ray. We all are very involved in the work that we do at NSBA on government issues. Ray, final thoughts here?
For me, looking at the salary and, again, what the employee is doing, but really communicating to those employees and developing a communication plan, as Keith has mentioned, to keep employees, managers informed all the way to December 1st. But again, remember it's salary plus duty.
Well, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Marie, for your time today. We appreciate the information. Again, look for this audio and webcast posted on our website at cose.org. Also, if you have time, take a look at cose.org/events. A lot of upcoming events and opportunities for education, networking, connecting with each other, including our Small Business Convention, October 13th and 14th. We're so excited about that coming up. Again, we appreciate your time today to the two of our experts, and also to all of you listening. And if you have questions or concerns, please get in touch. Thanks, and have a great day. Thank you.